They stole my disabled brother's wheelchair not just because they're heartless, but because they said people in wheelchairs make the neighborhood look cheap. Imagine their faces when they found out the man they stole from, the one they mocked for making the neighborhood look cheap, wasn't just some helpless guy in a wheelchair. He was a high-ranking federal official with deep ties to the FBI, someone with enough influence to turn their petty HOA dictatorship into a full-blown criminal investigation. Welcome to my channel. If you love HOA revenge stories, hit subscribe and stick around for this wild ride. Let me know in the comments what's the worst thing an HOA has ever done to you. It started with a letter, a bright red violation notice taped to my brother's front door, bold letters, declaring a $1,000 fine for unauthorized medical equipment in public view. At first, we thought it was a mistake, a clerical error, maybe some HOA drone misfiled a report, but when we called, the response was worse than we could have imagined. Wheelchairs and other mobility devices create an unsightly atmosphere and negatively impact property values, the HOA president Linda Holloway said over the phone, her tone dripping with condescension. We are enforcing new community aesthetic guidelines to maintain our neighborhood's prestige. I felt my blood turn cold. You're telling me you're finding a disabled man for needing a wheelchair? I asked, barely keeping my voice steady. We're not discriminating, she replied in that fake customer service voice. We're simply enforcing the same rules for everyone. If a homeowner has an object in public view that violates community standards, it must be removed. The next morning, my brother's wheelchair was gone, stolen right off the front porch. At first, we thought maybe it had been moved, that someone had seen the notice and taken it for safekeeping, but when we checked the security cameras, the truth hit us like a freight train. Two men in HOA-branded polo shirts walked right up to the house in the dead of night, grabbed the chair, loaded it into a white HOA maintenance truck, and drove off. No warning, no explanation, just theft, pure and simple. My brother Mark was livid. He had survived a car crash that should have killed him, spent years rebuilding his life, and now some power-hungry HOA board thought they could erase him like he was an inconvenience. They don't know who they're messing with, he muttered as I helped him into his backup wheelchair, an old, uncomfortable model he rarely used. They really don't. What the HOA didn't know, what they never bothered to check, was that Mark wasn't just some guy in a wheelchair. He had spent his career in federal intelligence, working on security clearances, counterterrorism operations, and high-profile investigations. He wasn't just connected to the FBI, he was an executive consultant for federal operations, someone with the authority to audit organizations, investigate misconduct, and pull strings in ways these HOA board members couldn't even begin to imagine, and they had just made themselves his next project. Let's start with their financials, he said, opening his laptop with a grim smile. No HOA pulls something this shady without having skeletons in their closet. Within an hour, we had their official filings, tax records, and expense reports. Some of it was standard, overpriced landscaping fees, ridiculous fines, vague community improvement projects. But then Mark found something interesting, a series of payments labeled special maintenance fund, each for thousands of dollars, withdrawn in cash. No receipts, no paper trail, just money disappearing into thin air. Looks like someone's been skimming, Mark muttered. This isn't just a power trip, this is fraud. I wasn't sure what was worse, the fact that they had the audacity to steal a disabled man's wheelchair, or the fact that they were likely embezzling money from the very homeowners they claimed to be protecting. But we needed more proof. If we were going to take them down, we had to be smart about it. That night, we attended the HOA meeting, sitting quietly in the back as Linda Holloway stood at the podium, cradling on about preserving neighborhood integrity and ensuring our community remains an elite residential area. I clenched my fists under the table, watching her smile like she hadn't just robbed a man of his mobility. When the meeting opened for homeowner concerns, I stood up. I'd like to ask about a theft that occurred under your watch, I said, my voice carrying through the room. My brother's wheelchair was taken from his property by two of your employees. We have video evidence. Would you care to explain? The room fell silent. A few homeowners glanced at each other, whispering. Linda's expression barely changed. If a non-compliant object is left in a visible area, the HOA has the right to remove it, she said smoothly. Your brother was given notice. You mean you stole a disabled man's essential medical device? I shot back. You committed grand theft under the excuse of aesthetic guidelines. Linda sighed dramatically. Sir, if you have a complaint, you're welcome to file it formally, but we follow protocol. Funny, I said, pulling out a stack of printed financial reports, because I'm curious about your protocol for these cash withdrawals from the HOA budget. Want to explain why there's nearly $200,000 missing from your financial records? Linda's face turned ghost white. The murmur of the crowd grew louder. That information is confidential, she stammered. Mark wheeled forward, his calm, commanding voice cutting through the noise. Not when it involves potential felony embezzlement, he said. Under federal law, financial misconduct within a registered homeowners association is subject to criminal investigation, and considering my position, I think I'll be putting in a few calls tomorrow morning. A few board members shifted uncomfortably. One of them, a wiry man named Greg, glared at Linda. You said everything was above board. He muttered under his breath that we didn't need to worry. Shut up, Greg, she snapped, but it was too late. The homeowners were already demanding answers. Where's our money? How much have you taken? What else are you hiding? Linda turned back to us, her expression twisting with barely concealed rage. You don't know who you're messing with, she hissed. Mark smirked. Neither do you. The meeting descended into chaos as Linda desperately tried to regain control, but the damage was done. We had planted the seed of doubt, and now it was just a matter of time before everything unraveled. That night, Mark sent his first email to a federal fraud investigator specializing in HOA corruption cases. The next morning, an unmarked black car parked across from Linda Holloway's house. The real fun was just beginning. Linda Holloway had no idea the storm she had just walked into the morning after the HOA meeting. Mark was already making calls, his fingers moving across his laptop keyboard with the precision of a man who had spent years handling high-stakes investigations. We're dealing with willful misconduct, theft, and financial fraud, he muttered, scrolling through lines of transaction records. If we push this the right way, the entire board is going down. I sat beside him, sipping my coffee, watching as he drafted emails to federal oversight committees, state housing regulators, and financial crime units. He wasn't just throwing accusations, he was building a case, the kind that would get attention. First step, he continued, we freeze their assets. I have enough evidence here to trigger a forensic audit. The moment that happens, the HOA's accounts get locked down. No more special maintenance fund withdrawals. He clicked send, then turned to me with a grin. By the end of the day, these crooks won't even be able to pay for their own office supplies. The first domino fell at 10:14 a.m. when an official-looking email from the State Department of Homeowner Affairs landed in the HOA's inbox. It was a notice of pending financial review citing suspicious transactions and potential violations of fiduciary duty. Mark had worded it carefully to sound like an internal investigation, but we both knew the second Linda saw it, she'd panic. Sure enough, 20 minutes later, her car screeched out of her driveway, tearing down the street toward the HOA office. She's running to try and cover her tracks, Mark said, watching the live security camera feed from his laptop. Too late, Linda. Meanwhile, I had other work to do. I walked door to speaking to neighbors who had been hit with mysterious fees and fines over the past year. Every homeowner I talked to had at least one story of HOA overreach, whether it was a bogus violation, an unexplained increase in dues, or aggressive threats of foreclosure. I took notes, collecting statements, gathering witnesses. By noon, I had a folder full of homeowner complaints, each one another nail in the HOA's coffin. The next move was Mark's. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. Special Agent David, he said smoothly, I have a case you might be interested in. Multi-state HOA fraud, financial manipulation, and organized criminal activity disguised as community governance. Would you like to review the files? There was a long pause on the other end before the voice replied, I'll be there in 2 hours at 2:30 p.m. 3 unmarked black SUVs rolled into the neighborhood, stopping just outside the HOA office. I watched from the sidewalk as 3 men in suits stepped out, badges flat, NG, walking past the stunned receptionist straight into Linda's office. 20 minutes later, she was let out in handcuffs. The neighborhood was silent, every homeowner standing on their porches watching as the woman who had ruled over them with an iron fist was escorted to the back of a government vehicle. She screamed, demanding a lawyer, insisting she had done nothing wrong. But the agents weren't listening. They had bank statements, emails, video evidence. Mark had handed them a bulletproof case, and Linda was just the beginning. That's one down, I said, exhaling. How many more to go? The whole bore, Mark answered, not even looking up from his laptop. And we about to speed things up. He forwarded copies of the evidence to every HOA board member, attaching one simple message: resign immediately or expect federal agents at your doorstep. The first resignation came. And at 4:12 p.m., a short panicked email from Greg, the RI board member, who had looked the most nervous at last night's meeting. By 6:30 p.m., 2 more members had quit. The rest held out, too arrogant or too stupid to realize they were already finished. Then came the final blow at 7:45 p.m. Mark's phone rang. He answered casually, leaning back in his wheelchair. Yes, oh really? That's fascinating. No, I'll be happy to assist. He hung up and turned to me, his smile sharp as a knife. Guess who's getting a full IRS audit? I nearly choked. You're kidding. Not at all. Seems someone's been under-reporting taxable income, and since HOA funds are considered nonprofit revenue, any embezzlement is technically federal tax fraud. He cracked his knuckles. Linda's going to be sharing a prison cell with her treasurer before the week's out. The next morning, news van showed up. A local reporter had gotten wind of the story, and suddenly our quiet suburban neighborhood was front-page material. I stood in the driveway watching as cameras rolled, neighbors eagerly stepping forward to tell their HOA horror stories. The headline on the evening news read, OA president arrested in multi-state fraud investigation, but my favorite moment that was yet to come at 8 p.m., a last-minute emergency. HOA meeting was called. Mark and I arrived early, taking seats near the front. The remaining board members sat at the long table, their faces pale, their hands shaking. Linda's chair sat empty, a stark reminder of what happened to those who abused their power. Greg, the last holdout, stood up to speak. Effective immediately, he said, his voice trembling. The board of the Willow Creek OA is hereby dissolved. The crowd erupted into cheers. I felt a wave of satisfaction washed over me as homeowners clapped, hugged, and laughed. It was over. No more unjust fines, no more stolen money, no more dictatorship. Mark wheeled forward, his voice calm but firm. I suggest, he said, that you start refunding every homeowner you've ever wrongfully fined. Greg nodded furiously. Yes, of course, we'll work with authorities to return all misappropriated funds. You'll do more than that, I added, stepping beside Mark. You're going to return my brother's wheelchair. The entire room went silent. Greg swallowed hard. We make sure it's returned right away. The next morning, we woke up to find a brand new top-of-the-line wheelchair sitting on Mark's porch, an anonymous note attached. Consider this an apology. We were wrong. I looked over at Mark, who was smirking down at the chair like he had just won the biggest case of his life. I think, he said, rolling forward, we just made history. The fallout hit the neighborhood like a hurricane. With Linda gone, the HOA collapsed faster than anyone had expected. Homeowners who had lived in fear of arbitrary fines and ridiculous rules suddenly realized they had power, and they wanted justice. Within 24 hours, the neighborhood group chat was flooded with calls for reimbursement, demands for legal action, and angry messages from people who had been forced to sell their homes due to unlawful fees. Mark sat at his laptop, tracking everything. They're panicking, he said, watching as the remaining board members scramble to cover their tracks. A few of them are deleting emails, trying to wipe transactions. Amateurs. He forwarded everything to the federal agents investigating the case. That's obstruction of justice. They'll be lucky if they don't end up in a cell next to Linda. Just as he sent the email, a new message popped up from an unknown number. The subject line, "You should stop now." My stomach clenched as I opened it. The email was short, to the point. You've made your point. You got what you wanted. Walk away before things get worse for you. I turned to Mark. Is this a threat? He didn't even look concerned. Of course it is, he said, pulling out a burner phone and forwarding the email to an encrypted contact. And in about 10 minutes, we'll find out exactly who sent it. The look in his eyes sent a chill through me. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was a hunt, and Mark was the predator. The response came faster than I expected. His contact sent back an IP address, location data, and a name. Mark whistled. Well, he murmured, turning the screen to face me. Looks like Greg, our dear ex-treasurer, just made his next mistake. Greg wasn't just a spineless follower. He was the one handling the money laundering operation behind the HOA's renovation fees. His digital fingerprints were all over shell company transfers, off-the-books payouts, and fake invoices. And now he was trying to intimidate us into dropping everything. I clenched my jaw. Let's pay Greg a visit. We found him exactly where we expected, his massive 3-story home a few blocks from Linda's old house. Unlike the rest of the neighborhood, his house had just undergone expensive HOA-approved upgrades. A brand new driveway, fresh exterior paint, new landscaping, all things homeowners had paid for, but never received. I rang the doorbell. It took a few moments before Greg cracked open the door, his face pale, his eyes darting around like a cornered animal. What do you want? He snapped. To talk, I said calmly, unless you prefer the FBI to do the talking instead. Greg's face went from pale to chalk white. He tried to shut the door, but Mark rolled forward, stopping it with his footrest. Bad move, Mark said, his voice cold. Because right now we're the only people willing to let you make a deal. Greg looked between us and the street like he was debating making a run for it. You have no idea what you're messing with, he stammered. This goes higher than just us. My stomach turned. Who? I pressed. Who's pulling the strings? Greg hesitated a second too long, and that's when Mark hit him with the final blow. Doesn't matter, he said, pulling up his phone screen, because I have your entire digital footprint, every fraudulent invoice, every wire transfer, every meeting you tried to scrub from your emails, and if I hit send on this, he waved the phone, it goes directly to the state attorney's office. Greg's breathing grew ragged. He was trapped, and he knew it. What do you want? He finally whispered. I smiled. Your full cooperation. An hour later, Greg folded like a house of cards. He gave us names, dates, everything. The fraud ran deeper than we had imagined. Linda and her board had been working with the VEL ERS to systematically target homeowners, forcing them to sell below market value under the threat of financial ruin. The HOA would then flip the properties to Investors who paid them kickbacks. It was never about the rules, Greg muttered, rubbing his face. It was about getting rid of people who didn't fit the neighborhood image. My stomach turned. You mean people like Mark? I said. Greg wouldn't meet my eyes that night, Mark, and I sent everything to law enforcement, the IRS, and the local news. The next morning, the first search warrants were executed. Police raided the HOA office and multiple homes tied to the fraud. They seized computers, financial records, and personal bank statements. Homeowners gathered outside watching in shock as their once powerful HOA board was dismantled piece by piece. The final bombshell came when the county prosecutor announced formal charges not just against Linda and Greg, but against 3 real estate investors, a property appraiser, and even a city official who had false iFID zoning documents. It was a criminal conspiracy, one that had stolen millions from unsuspecting homeowners. By the end of the week, the neighborhood was unrecognizable. The HOA was officially dissolved, with a court-appointed receiver stepping in to oversee the return of stolen funds. Formerly fearful neighbors now walked freely, talking to each other without looking over their shoulders. The once untouchable HOA elite either under arrest or bankrupt. Mark and I stood on his porch watching as a moving truck pulled up to Greg's house. Guess he took the deal, I mused, running before they slap him with something worse. Mark just chuckled, rolling his wheelchair forward. Cowards always do. A few moments later, Greg stepped outside, a box of belongings in his arms, his face lined with stress. He spotted us, hesitated, then muttered, I should have never signed on with them. I crossed my arms. You're right, you shouldn't have. A few days later, Mark's new wheelchair finally arrived, fully customized, top off the line, courtesy of the HOA Restitution Fund. It was a small victory, but a powerful one. As I watched him roll down the sidewalk, no longer just a man they tried to erase, but the man who took them down, I felt something shift for the first time in years. This neighborhood finally belonged to the people again. Mark turned back, smirking. So, he said, what's next? I grinned. Something tells me another corrupt HOA somewhere is about to have a really bad day. The aftermath of the HOA's downfall spread far beyond our neighborhood. The news of their corruption made headlines, and soon other HOAs started coming under scrutiny. Homeowners from different states began reaching out, sharing their own horror stories: unjust fines, fraudulent bookkeeping, illegal foreclosures. It was as if a floodgate had opened, exposing just how many communities had suffered under unchecked HOA power. Mark and I sat in his living room watching a live news report about a similar HOA scandal unfolding in another county. They're all the same, he muttered, scrolling through his emails. Different names, different faces, but the same dirty game: steal from the homeowners, abuse the rules, and line their own pockets. His inbox was flooded with messages, some from reporters, some from lawyers looking for evidence, and many from homeowners begging for help. I exhaled. We did what we came to do, I said. We exposed them, shut them down, and got justice. So why does it feel like we're just getting started? Mark smirked. Because we are. He turned his laptop around. On the screen was a growing database of corrupt HOAs, cases of fraud, embezzlement, discrimination. This isn't just one neighborhood, he said. It's a network of corruption, and we know exactly how to take them down. I stared at the list, realization dawning. You want to do this again? I said. Not just here, everywhere. Mark nodded, his expression serious. We've got the playbook now. We know how they operate, where to look for the cracks. We're not just homeowners anymore, we're the ones they should be afraid of. The thought was exhilarating and terrifying. How do we even start? I asked. He tapped the screen. We start with the biggest fraud we can find. That's when we got the call. A lawyer from a major metropolitan area had heard about our case. I have a client, he said. Elderly woman lost her home to an HOA foreclosure scam. The HOA used fake violation notices to rack up debt, then forcibly evicted her to sell her house for profit. She has nowhere to go, and the courts won't touch it. My stomach twisted. This was bigger than just fines and stolen money. This was stealing someone's entire life. Mark was already pulling up property records. Name of the HOA, he asked. The lawyer hesitated. It's run by a company called Neighborhood Solutions, LLC. They manage over 50 HOA in the state. This isn't just one corrupt board, it's a corporate-level operation. I met Mark's eyes were in. I said, within 2 hours, we had everything we needed: property records, fake liens, financial discrepancies. Mark found a pattern of fraudulent foreclosures, homes seized for manufactured violations, then sold to shell companies at a fraction of their value. It's not just one house, Mark muttered. They've done this to hundreds of people. MYOB, jaw clenched. So what do we do? He grinned. Same thing we did before, we make them regret it. The first step was exposure. We sent the case files to journalists, watchdog groups, and legal advocates. By morning, the story had gone viral. A national scandal about predatory HOAs stealing homes. The second step was hitting their financials. Mark used his federal contacts to trigger an IRS audit on Neighborhood Solutions, LLC. The moment their accounts were frozen, the scam collapsed. Lawsuits started pouring in, and within a week the company declared bankruptcy. Homeowners who had been wrongfully evicted started getting their houses returned. The final step, taking out the people responsible. We tracked down the CEO of Neighborhood Solutions, Robert Langford, a smug executive who had built a fortune by destroying people's lives. He laughed off the news reports, calling it overblown media hysteria. That's when Mark made his move. Using public records and whistleblower testimony, he connected Langford's company to federal contract fraud. He had been using government funds to expand his scam. We hand-delivered the evidence to federal prosecutors. 2 days later, Langford was arrested. As I watched the footage of him being let out of his office in handcuffs, I realized we had just taken down one of the biggest HOA corruption rings in the country. We weren't just homeowners fighting back anymore. We were the reckoning they never saw coming. Mark leaned back, watching the news with a satisfied smile. I think he said, we just found our new full-time job. The takedown of Neighborhood Solutions, LLC sent shockwaves through the entire country. HOAs everywhere were suddenly under investigation. State attorneys were flooded with complaints, and local governments started pushing for stricter HOA regulations. It was the beginning of a war, one that corrupt board members and corporate predators never saw coming. But we weren't done yet. Mark sat at his laptop, scrolling through an ever-growing list of corrupt HOAs, fraudulent property management firms, and rigged neighborhood elections. They all operate the same way. He muttered, keep homeowners scared, find them into submission, and steal their property if they resist. He looked up at me, his expression hard. We burn one nest, but there are hundreds more just like it. I leaned against the door frame, staring at the reports. So, what's next? I asked. Mark grinned. Simple, he said. We make an example out of the worst one. That's when we found Clearwater Property Management, a multi-state HOA firm that had been running scams in over a dozen communities. Their method: massive special assessments, forcing homeowners to pay for emergency repairs that never actually happened. If a homeowner couldn't afford to pay, the HOA would slap a lien on their house, then foreclose and flip it for profit. The worst part, their CEO, Richard Vaugh, had been bribing local officials to look the other way. This is the one, Mark said, his voice low. We don't just take them down, we destroy them. The plan was simple but ruthless. We started by contacting homeowners associations across the state, gathering evidence of Clearwater's fraud. It didn't take long. People were desperate to talk. They handed over emails, invoices, and even leaked internal memos outlining a strategy to push out undesirable residents, low-income families, elderly homeowners, disabled individuals. The corruption was systemic, but they had made one crucial mistake. They had left a paper trail. Mark compiled the evidence, drafting a detailed federal complaint. We're not just going after them for fraud, he said. We're hitting them with civil rights violations, racketeering, wire fraud, and conspiracy charges. He sent copies of the report to federal prosecutors, the state attorney general, and investigative journalists. The response was immediate. Within a week, Clearwater Property Management was all over the news. Homeowners rallied together, demanding refunds and lawsuits. But the real hammer fell when the Department of Justice stepped in. Federal agents raided Clearwater's corporate offices, seizing financial records, employee communications, and hard drives. The CEO, Richard Vaugh, was nowhere to be found. That's when Mark made his move. Using his network of federal contacts, he found a private jet record for Vaughn. He had fled to the Cayman Islands, trying to evade arrest. Mark forwarded the information to law enforcement, and within 48 hours, Vaugh was detained at the airport. It was game over with Vaugh in federal custody. The entire Clearwater empire collapsed overnight. Every fraudulent foreclosure was overturned, and homeowners got their properties back. More importantly, legislation was introduced at the state level to crack down on corrupt HOAs, limiting their power to foreclose and impose excessive fines. As the media storm died down, Mark and I sat in his backyard watching the sunset. The neighborhood was quiet. No HOA spies, no harassment, no fear. Homeowners had taken back their community. You think it's over? I asked, sipping my beer. Mark chuckled. Not even close, he said, but now they know we're coming. I looked out at the street, the houses. We had saved the people who had reclaimed their freedom. This wasn't just a revenge story anymore. This was the beginning of a movement. This story isn't just about a stolen wheelchair. It's a wake-up call. When the wrong people are in power, your silence becomes their strongest weapon. YW checkmark. Always research an HOA, homeowners association, thoroughly before moving into any neighborhood. Why'd Heavy Checkmark keep records of every notice, email, fine, or suspicious action that could become your strongest evidence? Why'd Heavy Checkmark if you're a victim of abuse or corruption? Don't stay silent. Fight back. Get legal support. Stand your ground. Why'd Heavy Checkmark be cautious of vague policies and aesthetic rules? Your personal freedom shouldn't hang on a community bulletin board. Collision and HOA is not the law. They do not have the right to crush humanity, diversity, or personal dignity. And if you've ever been insulted, scammed, or felt powerless, remember this. Fire, you're not alone. And you have the power to fight back. Fire, stand up for yourself and for the thousands of others suffering in silence. Fire, make corrupt HOA boards a lesson in what happens when greed and control go too far. If you enjoy HOA downfall stories, make sure to subscribe, share your own experience in the comments, and join the movement to change the game. We're not just homeowners, we're the nightmare corrupt HOAs never saw coming.